conclude at 5. And I believe, Mr. Capizzo, you were at Objectors Exhibit 1, Figure 1A, asking a question of Dr. Rice.
That is correct, Madam Chair. And I just want to confirm, so I did you say I know you mentioned it yesterday. Are we concluding at 5 today? Is that correct?
We are.
Okay, thank you. That'll just help me manage the time.
Okay.
Okay, may I proceed, Madam Chair?
Please.
Dr. Rice, I know you've switched locations to Zanzibar now, as you just were indicated, but during this break, did you speak to anybody about your testimony that you're giving today?
No.
Okay, excellent. That's what I was hoping you'd say. So let's take you back. I'm going to share the screen. You know, one sec though. I know I only said, did you speak to anybody? Did you communicate with anybody about your testimony, whether it was a text, email, or whatever other device you use about your testimony today?
I sent a text to Leslie Parker.
Okay, you don't tell me what she said, but you did send a text to Leslie Parker.
Yes, I did.
Did she respond to you?
No.
Okay, I'm going to share screen. Give me 1 second. And for the, let's see. Can you see that map?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Okay. So I just want to reorient the committee where we were. We were talking about, you'd given an opinion that Mr. Raso had demonstrated that this facility won't interfere or significantly impact existing public access or use of the tidal waters and or the shore.
Yes.
Okay. And you also gave the opinion that Mr. Raso has demonstrated that the alteration activity will not result in significant conflicts with water-dependent uses and activities such as the recreational boating, fishing, swimming, navigation, and commerce. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. You testified that you're familiar with this map, and we're looking for, again, as the record, we're going to start at Seaguar Cove. And I believe you said that if we're traveling north, that was the only direction that you can go from those 4 public access points that you said you were familiar with. Yes,
those are public access points that are largely for very small craft that could go through there. This is not a major, those are not major boat launching areas.
But the public has access and they can launch from there?
Yes.
Okay. I want to draw your attention to we talked, or I'd asked you, and you testified that there's two deep water coves in Potter Pond. So I'm going to draw your attention to the north of Seaguar Cove, and where my cursor is now, following the blue line. Is that the northern part of the cove, the second deep water cove?
Yes, that is. That's the major one. The so-called Skiers Cove.
This is the one. Okay, I got it. So this is the same one that Mr. Raso talked about that he lives on now, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so this is where Mr. Raso lives up here. Are there? It doesn't appear, at least, or are you familiar with any public access points on Skiers Cove?
I'm not familiar with the whether there's public access there or not.
Fair enough. Is it fair to say that the only way to get to Skiers Cove is to go through Potter Pond?
I can't say for sure, but I would suspect that might be true.
Yeah, let me rephrase that, because I think the question may have been a little confusing. Is the only way to get to Potter Pond from Seaguar Cove by a motor vessel through Potter Pond?
Yes, I mean, basically it appears that the access ways are either through the channel to Point Judith Pond itself, or from these various access areas.
Okay, so if you can, tell me if you can see my cursor. It was working last time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
it's working.
thank you. So starting in Cigar Cove, leaving that mooring field, if you were to travel to the Northern Cove, have you been to the Northern Cove,
Yes,
the Northern Basin?
yes,
Okay. And how did you get to the Northern Basin? Was it with Mr. Raso?
yes.
Okay. Where did you leave from when you went with Mr. Raso?
We left from his dock, his dock at the restaurant.
Okay. So just so I understand and the committee members understand, is his restaurant, is it, and following my cursor to the east,
Yes,
is that his restaurant right there?
that's his restaurant right there.
Where the cursor is? Okay. And what road is that restaurant's on?
That's on Succotash Road.
Okay. And I'm not that familiar with that area, at least can you access Potter Pond from Mr. Raso's restaurant?
Yes, that is actually the main water inlet to the pond. And in fact, all of the tidal exchange for the pond goes right through there. So the currents going through that channel are very, very intense during sort of peak tidal exchange.
Okay. So you take when you went with Mr. Raso, you took the small boat, I think we said, and you went through that little channel right there?
Yes,
Okay. And did you go to the Northern Basin when you were with him?
yes,
Okay. So is it fair to say that the way you went there, following the cursor, you would have gone north up Potter's Pond?
yes. It was toward the end of the trip, but I've been up there several times.
Okay. Okay. On your own?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a boat? Do you own a boat?
No, I don't.
Okay, but how did you come to find yourself on, I guess, Skiers Cove?
Well, I've accessed it from several ways. I mean, basically from Perry Raso's house in the vegetable farm. He's got the vegetable farm at the north end of the pond, and been there and on boats several times.
Okay.
Various people.
Okay.
I don't own a boat, but
Okay, but you probably a best case scenario, you don't own the boat, but you know people who own the boat, so you can get to these locations.
right. I mean, it's best to know people.
Fair enough. Now, when you went from, so we understand, the committee understands, or I understand now how you got to the Northern Basin. I want to talk about going from Mr. Raso's restaurant to Cigar Cove.
Yes.
Okay. Excuse me. So when you left the restaurant on this trip with Mr. Raso, you traveled, I guess you could say, southwest past his current operation. Would that fit?
Yes, in between that point and his current operation. That's where the deepest water navigation channel is. It gets fairly, yeah, and it's the most, and it happens to be the most direct. There's a shallow area that you have to avoid.
Okay, and is that shallow? So I'm gonna take you 2 steps. And right here, is this the channel that you're talking about? That's deep water?
Yes.
Okay, so for the record, it's between, and I don't know what point that is, but it's the point to the right, or excuse me, to the east of Ram Point, which you're familiar with, you said.
Yeah.
And between Mr. Raso's current operation, do you know what his size of his current operation is?
No, I don't know the exact size. I thought it was. I'm not entirely sure.
That's okay.
Offhand.
That's all right. So right there, where his driving by that aquaculture application that is highlighted in red. Do you know what the depths are there? Is it deep? Is it shallow? I think you'd mentioned that.
Yeah, it's fairly shallow there.
Okay.
Yeah, at low tides, at extreme low tides, sometimes the oysters are out of the water.
When you say the oysters are out of the water, does that mean the cages are out of the water?
Yes,
Okay. And are you familiar with that operation there?
very familiar.
Okay. What type of operation does Mr. Raso have there? You said it's floating cages?
Well, the vast majority are bags that are plastic mesh bags that are on sort of a railing system, and these bags get attached by bungee cords to it,
Okay,
and they're in very neat little lines.
okay. And on the south side of that, of Mr. Raso's aquaculture farm, is that area still shallow as well?
Oh, it's very, very shallow. Yeah, it's very sandy bottom.
Can you-
In the last few storms, it's become a little bit more shallow.
Do you know if you can water ski in that area to the south of that farm?
No, I mean, that would be pretty dangerous and actually probably outboard engine extensions would be dragging bottom.
Okay, so when you said no, you're saying you can't water ski in that area right there.
Right, that would be not particularly wise.
Okay. I want to bring you back to the channel that you were talking about. If you follow the cursor going west towards Ram Point and Seagar Cove, you've got Ram's Point to the north where the cursor is.
Yes, and the Hunt's house right there.
Yeah, so that's good memory. So when you prepared for your testimony, did you review the entire CRMC file?
Yes, I looked through pretty much everything.
Everything that's on file with Coastal?
Yeah, everything that was sent to me, yeah.
Okay, do you remember what that included?
Well, there was your package from the ESS group. We've got Dave Butel's report. We've got the various applications that Mr. Raso had. So those are what I have.
I thought you testified that you also reviewed the letters of objection.
There was, yeah, I saw a few of the letters of objection.
Okay. Okay. Going to Ram's Point, you said Mr. Hunt's property is to the north, and the channel between, okay, strike that. Gardiner's Island, are you familiar with Gardiner's Island?
I don't know which one exactly is Gardiner's Island.
All right, so across
Yeah,
from
that-
Ram's Point.
Oh, okay, if that's Gardiner's Island, okay,
Okay.
I'll buy that.
But you're familiar with that channel right there, correct?
Yes, I am.
Is that the only way to access Seagar Cove?
Other than the public access points for small craft, yes. I mean, if you're basically coming in, there's no boat launching ramps in that area.
Okay. And the area that I'm outlining right now, you reviewed his application. I think we went through this, and the general area where he's having proposing his 3-acre farm is right along the western portion of Mr. Hunt and Miss Cooney's property,
That is correct.
along this shoreline right here. Okay.
Yes.
Do you have an opportunity to go to the northern part of Seagar Cove?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What about the western side of Seagar Cove?
Yes, we went all the way around those as well.
Okay. How many times have you been to Seagar Cove other than that one time with Mr. Raso?
Oh, I've been there a couple times, boating there with some friends.
Okay, power boating?
Power boating.
Okay. When you say a couple times, more than
I
two?
mean a couple times, not more than 2. Other than, yeah, just.
Okay, and in the 2 times, is one of those times with Perry, or was that separate and apart from being with Perry?
Separate and apart.
So other than with Perry, you've only been to Seagar Cove once.
Twice.
I'm sorry, so a total of 3 times.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So when the 3 times that you've been there, did you observe recreational or water dependent, what Coastal calls water dependent uses and activities such as recreational boating, fishing, swimming, navigation, and commerce?
There's the times that I were there was in the high summer, and there were people that were boating and there were some people that were fishing.
Okay. And do you recall what areas of Potter Pond they were boating and fishing?
Well, I can recall that there were people kind of more on the sort of the south south side of the cove, kind of the Gardener's Island area.
So fair to say this area right here?
Yep,
Okay. And what about you? Were you on a powerboat, sailboat?
powerboat.
Powerboat, okay. And how about activity over here? Did you make any observations of activity over where the proposed aquaculture farm is?
No, I don't recall ever seeing anything ever there.
Okay,
But again, I've only been there 3 times, so
gotcha.
add your weight to that.
Okay. Okay, may have a moment, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I would like to, at this point, move to have the CRMC file that Dr. Rice reviewed entered as a full exhibit. That he indicated that he reviewed the entire file, including all the objections. And I'd ask that that be moved as a full exhibit.
Well, it already is in the record. I mean, that's the basis for this matter going forward. So I don't know why it has to be admitted as a full exhibit if it's part of the file already. I mean, it's the basis for this application.
I guess my point is, Mr. DeSisto, I just want to ensure that that entire file is available for the subcommittee to review since this expert is basing his opinions on his review of that entire file, including any reports or letters that he indicated and testified that he reviewed. So if it's already part of the file and a review, I just want to make sure that the subcommittee has the ability to review that entire file that he relied on.
The application wouldn't be heard if the subcommittee didn't have access to the file. I just think it's duplicative.
Okay, that's fine. As long as it's already in as a full, as part of the file, and the committee will have an opportunity to look at that. That's all I wanted to accomplish.
So I don't really understand what the CRMC file is, how that's defined, what he looked at. So I don't know what we're admitting as a full exhibit.
Well, here's the thing, and I agree with you, Madam Chair, by the way. But, you know, the file's the file. And the file that Dr. Rice has stated that he's reviewed, that's a public document. It's part of the file already, and it's part of the package that the subcommittee gets going forward. So I don't know why you'd want to put that in as an exhibit anyway. It just seems to be in twice.
If I may interject, I know this is Leslie's witness. 2 weeks or so ago, I asked Lisa Turner for the file, and she sent it to me on a USB. That's what I sent to Dr. Rice, in addition to what else he described. I'll send it to you, Christian, if you want to take a look at it.
No, as long as Mr. DeSisto and Madam Chair, as long as that whatever is encompassed in the file that Mr. Butel reviewed to come up with that staff recommendation is available for the subcommittee to review, I'm all set. And I think for the record, we want to make sure that that is part of what the subcommittee, whether it's an exhibit or it's automatically reviewed by the file, any reviewing court will want to know that it is part of the subcommittee's review.
And I will state that what Dr. Rice was referring to was what I forwarded to him that was provided to me by Ms. Turner from CRMC. 2 weeks, a week and a half ago, maybe, yeah.
So Ms. Turner is on. Is Ms. Turner on, and she can just say what that is?
I can also read out the there are 14 documents included. Do you want me to read it? Is it
Sure.
helpful to read out what they are?
Sure.
Okay, CRMC staff reports and reference materials, application materials, state and local comments, Dave Butel email correspondence, attorney information, public notification, pictures cover sheet, July 2019 pictures, August 2019 pictures, September 2019 pictures, October 2019 pictures, letters of support, letters of objection, comments received after public notice expiration date.
Okay, so that doesn't include the applicant's exhibits and memos and the opponents, the objectors.
We were asked for this before any of that would have been submitted.
Okay.
So I don't think it may now be included.
All right, I don't have a problem with that as it's been defined, and I'm looking at it right now too.
Madam Chair, it's Ray Coyer. Can I ask something?
You may.
Does the witness have anything that we do not have?
No.
Then what does it matter then? We've got either everything he has or more. And I think what Attorney Capizzo wants to be sure is that we have what he's referring to, and I think staff can attest to that. And I think our counsel, Anthony, has said that the file is the file. If they called out certain things to send to him for his testimony, that's something from what we have.
Right, Mr. Coy, I didn't know if it included all the exhibits that were being proffered by applicant and objectors counsel, if that's part of the quote unquote file. So that, and I understand that's not. So I'm okay with how the CRMC file has been defined and that be an exhibit. We consider it would be, if there was any appeal, it would be the certified record on appeal.
And for the record, I believe Dr. Rice testified to this, but he also does have things that were submitted after we received the CRMC file. So I think he testified that he has the ESS report, the objectors materials, and our exhibits.
Okay, so Tony, do we need to do anything other than admit it as an exhibit as it's been defined as the CRMC file?
You can, but you're gonna have a file and then you're gonna have an exhibit, which is the file. So to me, it's just duplicative. I hope it doesn't confuse things later on when it gets to court. That's my concern.
Okay. Mr. Capizzo, are you satisfied that it will be duplicative and you don't need to have it admitted as a full exhibit?
Yes, my only concern, as the vice chair had said, is I wanted to make sure that the subcommittee who's reviewing this has the opportunity to review all of that information that's being referred to and that individuals are basing their opinion on. So if that's part of the record, then I'm satisfied.
Yeah, all those items have been provided to this subcommittee.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions for Dr. Rice.
Madam Chair, if I may have a short redirect.
Yes.
Dr. Rice, you're aware that the current application lays out 3 plans for the possible site for the aquaculture farm. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Would you say, from reviewing those plans and your expertise, that the original site plan submitted by Mr. Raso provides more access to the shoreline? Is that right?
That is correct. I mean, that is demonstrable, and we saw that from the testimony of the engineer yesterday.
And when you reviewed site plans with Mr. Capizzo, did he show you that original site plan that was submitted by Mr. Raso in his application?
I sort of recall this, the subsequent ones, but not the original.
So he showed you the polygon?
Yes, the
site plan?
polygon, yes.
And finally, Dr. Rice, based on your review of the application and your expertise, does this application at the full 3 acres provide the balance of aquaculture and public access sought by the CRMC legislation?
Yeah, for the record.
Yes, it does. It basically fulfills all of the requirements, and it has been gone through a very extensive review according to the procedures that the statute that Attorney Capizio has pointed out, including the Marine Fisheries Council.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Ms. Noonan, do you have 2 or 3 more witnesses? Just one? You're on mute. You're still on mute.
Just one. Just
Okay.
one.
Okay.
Sorry. But that meant just one anyway. So.
Okay. And so you're not calling, is it Chris Duhamel, because you had Mr. Osgood
That's correct. Yes.
substitute, and then you had Rice, Byron, and you're at Rolt now?
Row, correct.
Oh, sorry, Rue.
Mhm, yep.
Okay.
All right.
So you have 50 minutes, and hopefully we can get through this witness with some cross-examination questions.
Okay. If I can quickly, just one housekeeping. I forgot to move Dr. Byron's CV full. Can I move that full?
No objection.
No objection.
Thank you.
Yes, submitted.
Can we pull up Dr. Robert Rowe? And thank you, Dr. Rice. We'll take you out of Zanzibar. Okay, great. There's Dr. There you go. Good afternoon, Dr. Rowe. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Great. Witness needs to be sworn.
You're on mute.
Oh. Oh, no. Okay.
Do solemnly swear the testimony that you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God.
I do.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Robert Rowe.
Again, good evening. I'd like to have Exhibit 4. Mr. Moore, if you could find Exhibit 4, which should be Dr. Rowe's CV. And as he pulls that up, if I can start with you, Dr. Rowe, can you please give the council some of your background as set forth on Exhibit 4?
So I have a master's degree in zoology at URI, PhD in biological oceanography from Graduate School of Oceanography at URI. 20 years of experience growing oysters in Point Judith Pond. One of the people who helped craft the current regulations. Sold my farm 13 years ago to become the executive director of the East Coast Shellfish Growers Association, where I represent growers from Maine to Florida. Largely on federal matters, but occasionally on state matters like this.
Do you teach also?
I also, so my appointment with the East Coast Shellfish Growers is a half-time position. So I'm also an adjunct professor at URI. I teach through the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training. I teach on other opportunities, and I do consulting work on the side, nationally and internationally.
All right. And have you also published papers in your field?
Several book chapters, several dozen peer-reviewed scientific publications. and a number of opinion pieces.
And what professional affiliations do you have?
I'm a member of a number of professional associations, from the National Aquaculture Association, National Shell Fisheries Association, and I'm sure I'm forgetting there's probably half
I
a
believe they're
dozen.
listed on page 1 of your curriculum vitae. I would, and can I ask the most important question, is that, are you the guy that gave us Moonstone oysters?
I was the owner of Moonstone Oysters, president and CEO for about 20 odd years. Started out as a hatchery, then moved on to growing and selling oysters. Quite proud of that.
Great. I would ask that Dr. Rowe be qualified as an expert in aquaculture.
Any objection?
No objection.
No objection.
Okay, will someone make a motion to accept the qualification of Mr. Rowe as an aquaculture expert?
Madam Chair, Ray Coyer makes that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Coy. Is there a second?
Reynolds, seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Any discussion? Okay, I'll do a roll call. Ray Coya,
Ray Coyer votes aye.
Patricia Reynolds,
Aye.
Don Gomez,
Don Gomez, aye.
Vin Murray,
Vin Murray, aye.
okay, and myself, Jennifer Cervenka, aye. Motion carries to qualify.
And I would also ask that his curriculum vitae be admitted full, Exhibit 4.
It's admitted full.
Thank you. Dr. Rice, you were retained as an expert in this matter, correct?
I'm Dr. Rowe, but yes,
Sorry. That was my mistake. Dr. Rowe, thank you. And do you know Mr. Raso?
I do.
All
We
right.
met, I employed him briefly as a diver in early 2000s, before he started his farm. Subsequently, as president of the Ocean State Aquaculture Association, where he was a member of, we would meet on occasion. And my wife is a big fan of his restaurant, so we would occasionally see him there.
And do you serve on the Shellfish Advisory Panel?
I am an alternate, so I was called up the day of that hearing when he was being, his application was being reviewed. I got a call that afternoon, and the primary, Jeff Gardner, said he couldn't attend. So I made plans to attend,
And that committee made a positive recommendation at that time, correct?
we did, yes.
And at that time, did you have any idea that you would be providing testimony for Mr. Raso on this application?
Providing this testimony at this time, or
Right.
providing testimony or at that particular meeting? I mean, I knew at that time that Perry Raso's application was going to be reviewed. Going into that meeting, I was not totally caught off guard.
All right. But in terms of your expert testimony, you were not retained until well after that meeting, correct?
Well, that's correct, yes.
And other than discussions at the Shellfish Advisory Panel and the work that we've done together since you've been retained as an expert, did you have any other knowledge of the application?
I had read certain publications, popular press, Facebook postings got circulated around. I tend to monitor what's going on in this state when it comes to aquaculture, so I was not totally in the dark, but I haven't been following it very carefully until very recently.
Okay. And did your involvement at the Shellfish Advisory Panel have any impact on your testimony here today?
I don't see, no.
In terms of the proceedings that we're at now, were you watching or listening to the testimony both yesterday and then earlier today, starting at 1 o'clock?
With rapt fascination, yes.
Wonderful. And we've heard a lot about this, but are you familiar with Mr. Raso's application? And if so, can you describe your familiarity with it to the committee?
I too reviewed the entire packet that was just discussed at length. I don't recall seeing extensive letters of objection, but obviously they were referred to in the coastal committees and the waterfront advisories letters. So pretty much aware that almost any aquaculture application is going to be met with a bunch of, shall we say, objectors.
And that's based on your personal experience since the 80s, correct? Or
Well, certainly this whole hearing is bringing up a sort of PTSD. I too had a coastal resources subcommittee hearing in Narragansett after 9 public hearings over a 2-year period, with 600 of objectors in my file. So I certainly am well aware of the nature of these proceedings.
did you have an opportunity to review the staff report, which is Exhibit 17,
Yes,
and you heard Mr. Butel testify?
yes.
All right. Obviously, you're familiar with the history of aquaculture. Can you just provide any further information of your familiarity with the history of aquaculture in Rhode Island?
Well, it goes way back. We once, at one point, had almost 1/3 of Narragansett Bay leased out for oyster aquaculture, and it provided hundreds of jobs in the late 1800s and early 1900s. 20,000 acres of Narragansett Bay was leased out for oyster farming. There were massive oyster shucking houses on the East Bay. It was one of the largest industries in the state.
Okay.
It went into disrepair when we discovered that bacteria caused disease. People stopped eating oysters. We had some wars that drove away the workforce. Hurricane of '38 buried most of the beds. The price of oysters was not sustained by the work involved. We brought aquaculture back in the, I want to say, the 70s. There was a Rhode Island Aquaculture Association. In fact, one of the early leases was in Water Skiers Cove, held by Dr. Rogers. And then I revived the Ocean State Aquaculture Association in the late 80s, started my farm in 86, started the Ocean State Aquaculture Association in 89, and we've experienced rather substantial growth subsequently.
Okay. And in hearing both Dr. Byron's and Dr. Rice's testimony, there's been this discussion about balancing, sort of the public's access to the water and aquaculture. Can you describe that based on your experience with the, aquaculture and the statutory, evolution in Rhode Island?
Sure. So I don't have to tell the council their job, but I mean, obviously the council is in charge of balancing the multiple uses of the state. And it's quite a challenge because anytime you permit something like a marina or a fish trap or a private dock or something like that, you are jeopardizing someone else's use of the free and common, the commons, and diminishing their access. So the council has to balance the various uses of the commons. And indeed, I think almost every state has something in their constitution, words to the effect that it is incumbent on the resource managers of the state to manage the subtitle. I'm sure I'm botching up the constitutional language badly, but to the benefit of the sovereign, not necessarily to the benefit of the waterfront homeowners right there, but to the sovereign, meaning the members, all the people of the state of Rhode Island. So the council has a very challenging task to balance these multiple users.
So when you're looking at an application such as this, and Dr. Rice was led through some questions by Mr. Capizzo about the impact of the polygon on the shores of Mr. Hunt's property, while that may be all true or have an impact, is that the balance that is required under the CRMC regulations?
Well, certainly, the coastal waterfront homeowners have the right to wharf out and have riparian access. Both of the adjacent waterfront homeowners have docks. So that right is being honored. And people have the right of recreation and certainly the fisheries and the fisheries impairment in terms of what would be impaired by a 3-acre lease in that area, either option A or option B, has been addressed and looked at, and both DEM and Mr. Butel have looked at it and determined that it's not a huge loss of fisheries access. And then we look at the recreational use. And in my mind, this is one of those spots that's almost ideal, because you have to try and find a spot that impairs the least number of people to the least extent possible. And so, obviously we've got a bunch of rules that say you can't put a farm in the middle of the channel. That's not, you can't impair certain fisheries resources, essential fish habitat, submerged aquatic vegetation. These are all off limits. But when you find a spot that's sort of out of the way, that is tucked to the side and impairs the least amount of space and the least amount of users in the most insignificant fashion, then to me, that seems like the perfect spot to try and squeeze in a little bit of aquaculture. When we created the 5% rule, it was an attempt to try and placate. So I'm just going to take you back a little bit through the history of the evolution of the 5% rule. We were challenged by largely shell fishermen who were complaining that we were growing far too fast. I was applying for a 7-acre lease expansion above my initial 2-acre lease. And I was being called the Walmart of shellfish aquaculture in Rhode Island. Obviously, this was growth that was out of control. So a moratorium was being proposed by the Marine Fisheries Council. So we re-engaged the group that we had established, the Aquaculture Working Group, which is a multi-stakeholder group to really sit down and try and hash out the various issues. And I wrote one of the chapters entitled Carrying Capacity. I did some research and looked around, and we were being accused of consuming too much of the phytoplankton. In other words, that the shellfish that our farms were consuming was going to impair the wild shellfish in the area. And so I looked at the literature, and there wasn't a lot at the time, but we did find some related work down in New Zealand. And I tried to do some back of the envelope calculations. It was very rough. At the time, we all acknowledged that this was an imperfect comparison, that this giant bay in New Zealand was anything like the ponds of Rhode Island. But we all agreed that the calculation that I did was at the very least a very conservative estimate of the ecological carrying capacity. And until we had better available science, it was a recommendation based on the best available science. So we went with it. Everybody agreed. Everyone had a chance to challenge it. This was a consensus document, and we all agreed that until better science was available, we would work with a 5% as an estimate of the ecological carrying capacity. And as long as we didn't exceed that, we could rest assured that we were not sucking up all the phytoplankton to the disbenefit of all the wild animals that depend on it. Everyone agreed that that was good. And then about 5 years later, Carrie was able to do her modeling work and showed quite eloquently and very convincingly that my rough calculation was obviously a vast underestimate, and that there was a capacity in terms of the ecological carrying capacity. We could put a lot more shellfish back in the water. In terms, it just makes a lot of sense. If you look historically at the populations of shellfish in these areas long before man started to get here, we had, these bottoms were paved with shellfish. We are quite able predators. These oysters can't escape very well, and we're very prone to overharvest. So populations are well down from where they were historically. But
when you talk about consensus and reaching that, who was at the table for that?
It was a multi-stakeholder group of about 30 people called the Aquaculture Working Group, with representatives from all various walks of life. We had biologists, scientists, fishermen. We brought in pretty much anybody who was willing to attend 20-odd meetings over a space of, I think, a year and a half.
Okay. Are you familiar then, based on all this experience, with the Category B assent requirements for CRMC that apply to all applications that fall, including aquaculture, correct?
Very, very much so.
Okay. The first requirement is need. Can you address the concept of need generally in the context of aquaculture?
Sure. So we added that based on concerns that were raised by the fishermen because we didn't want people coming in and leasing up areas on a speculative basis. So in other words, we wanted people to show that they had filled up their first 3 acres before they applied for another. And that was what we meant. It was probably poorly worded, but that was the intent of that section, that you shouldn't be allowed to apply for more acreage beyond your 3 acres, your initial 3-acre application, until you had filled that up, because we didn't want people leasing up areas in a speculative fashion. And so that was the primary thing. But I think, broadly, to put it in terms that perhaps a lawyer would understand, need, do you need to hire another partner and more interns to get more clients? Or as a restaurant, do you need to have another location? Well, certainly, as any businessman would be able to tell you, that the larger your operation, that there's economies of scale. And so your fixed costs are largely fixed and remain a small percentage of your operating costs. And if you can expand your business, you will be more efficient in terms of the proportion of fixed costs to variable costs. So you become more economic if you can increase the scale of your operation. And I would just add that Perry's operation at 7 acres, or soon hopefully to be 10, is a small farm, very small farm.
Okay. So we talked generally about the need. Let me ask you specifically, do you have an opinion whether or not Mr. Raso has demonstrated a need for this proposed oyster and scallop farm of 3 acres?
Objection. No foundation.
I believe I've laid the foundations. He's looked at the application, he's heard the testimony, he's given his background, he understands the standard.
I don't understand how that's a foundation for what his need is for an oyster farm. I frankly still don't understand from his testimony what this need requirement means. And I don't think that he, because he had a hand in drafting it, should have any admissibility before the subcommittee.
Rather than having an argument between the lawyers, Madam Chair, what I'm going to suggest here is allow the witness to answer the question, and it can go to the weight as to whether or not he actually has expertise in this. But at this stage, I think it's permissible for him to answer and then be cross-examined on it.
And if I could just request that I will interpose objections. I don't mean to, and we don't have to have an argument after each one, but I want it for the record to interpose objections.
That's fine. And then you'll get your chance on cross-examination.
May I ask if this is going to be a continuing objection for this entire line of questioning?
Yes, if I could do that.
Okay, you can.
Can I ask the stenographer to read the question back, please?
Question. So we talked generally about the need. Let me ask you specifically, do you have an opinion whether or not Mr. Raso has demonstrated a need for this proposed oyster and scallop farm of 3 acres?
So as I said, based on the reasoning for which that standard was inserted, yes, I believe that Mr. Raso has clearly filled up the space of his existing lease. And that was certainly the intent. If you want to take a different view of the term need, I would say that he wants to grow scallops. He needs additional depth. This is a spot with greater depth. I think that shows he needs greater depth to grow scallops and lantern nets. I think that is another view of the term need. And in terms of profitability and economies of scale, I think that is a perfectly valid interpretation of the term need as well. So I would say that, yes, depending on how you choose to interpret the term need, he has fulfilled in all 3 considerations.
Okay. And do you have an opinion as to whether or not the shellfish aquaculture proposed by Mr. Raso will have any negative effect upon the erosion or deposition along the shore?
So looking at Cedar Cove, you know, one thing that I notice about the cove is that a lot of the homes, especially along the south side, are protected by buttresses. It looks like there's erosion concerns, probably from boat wakes. There's not a lot of fetch for wave action, but erosion seems to be a concern. A lot of the homes have got riprap and things like that. On the north side, where immediately adjacent, that's a rocky beach. I don't imagine that that's got significant erosion right there, but you know, you can expect structures in the water to mitigate wave energy slightly. We don't have good science on the amount of wave energy mitigation, but if anything, it would slow the erosive effects of the boat wakes on that particular shore. I can't imagine that we would experience anything else.
Since you talked in detail, can you tell the committee about your familiarity with Cedar Cove?
So I've been to Cedar Cove once.
Okay. And you visited the proposed site?
I did.
Okay. And just going back generally to oyster farming and aquaculture, is it considered a green industry?
Absolutely. It's one of the things I'm most proud of. We get very high marks from the environmental communities, such as Monterey Bay Aquarium, the Nature Conservancy, other things like that, because we have no foods, no drugs, no chemicals, no fertilizers. We get the gold star, and then to boot, we offer what are called ecosystem services. In other words, benefits that we sort of take for granted. In other words, the animals filter the water, improving turbidity levels, mitigating the eutrophication impacts from excess fertilizer.
Can I stop you right there? What was the word that you used so the stenographer has it?
I'm sorry. So we mitigate the impacts of eutrophication. Eutrophication is a syndrome that's related to excess nitrogen and phosphate inputs from lawn fertilizer and wastewater from ISDS runoff. And so when you have, certainly these are fertilizers, and fertilizers are generally good, but when you have excessive amounts of nitrogen coming into the coastal waters, especially in almost all of our estuaries in the Northeast, we see something called eutrophication. It's a tendency for excessive algal blooms that are stimulated by the nitrogen and phosphate runoff. And the algal blooms can diminish water quality by causing eutrophication, which is low oxygen, buildup of excessive phytoplankton blooms, which will occasionally shade out eelgrass, and then change the nature of the bottom to be more dominated by gracilaria and lesser habitat types. So as I said, you know, because the shellfish feeding can mitigate and remove some of the nitrogen associated with the phytoplankton that they consume, we get the gold star from a lot of these environmental groups who recognize that, you know, when the Nature Conservancy is coming out in favor of aquaculture, shellfish aquaculture, you know you're doing something right.
And is Mr. Raso's proposed farm consistent with what you've just described for a green industry?
Absolutely.
Okay. Moving on to a different topic, do you have an opinion as to whether Mr. Rasos has taken measures to minimize any adverse scenic impact?
Well, certainly the low profile choice for his floating gear. We're trying to make it less, he's trying to make it less visible to, you know, certainly that is probably the primary concern that we hear on most applications is the aesthetic concern. Of course, it's very challenging to assess, you know, what in someone's eyes is offensive to their sense of aesthetics is not necessarily so to someone else. Like, for instance, I think those windmills off the coast are beautiful. Not everyone agrees with me.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, a nice, neat field of corn, to me, that's beautiful. but it's not what nature intended. So everyone has their own view of what is an aesthetic view and what is something that is not.
And the fact perhaps that the half of the farm is scallops that's not on the surface, does that also play in if for people that may find something on the surface offensive?
Yeah, certainly anything you can do to minimize the number of buoys, the number of things that are sitting on top of the water is going to, hopefully minimize the aesthetic impacts, if you will.
And have you worked with aquaculture farms that have been located in areas where the public participates in recreational activities?
Of course.
Right. And what type of recreational activities?
Well, I mean, my own farm, people would water ski down the middle, sail around, use the buoys as a slalom course, fishing. Fishing was actually quite popular on my lease. Turns out, and this was something I never predicted when I got into oyster farming, but the gear, the cages, serves as an excellent habitat. We actually did studies to show that associated with the bottom cages that I was using, we had 10 to 10,000 times as many juvenile fish associated with our gear as a nearby eelgrass bed. So it was something that I observed while diving on the lease, but I never expected it. And then there's all these larger fish that would come and circle around the lease to try and eat the smaller fish. So when I was taking my kids fishing, I was never a great fisherman, but I would always take them to the lease because I knew we would catch fish.
Okay. And in terms of the current application, have you seen the 3 different layout plans?
Yeah.
All right. And you've heard us talk about A, B, and C, right?
Yes.
What's the effect of changing the original rectangle to either the polygons depicted in B and C?
So most of the discussion is focused on B, alternate B. The initial polygon, it's a regular shape, easy to mark. You have 4 corner markers. It's relatively easy to manage in terms of laying out your lines and dealing with that. I believe that the effort to move the polygon and go to so-called preferred alternate B was an attempt to move away from the area of the center of the pond where the water sports activities has been described, move it closer to the beach and get it out of the main area of water sports activities. And I think it achieves that. The detriment is that you're obviously closer to the shore. So you have to look at, are you impacting activities on the shore and access to the water by the hunts? And I believe it's I forget the neighbor to the north, Capuzzo, is it Capuzzo? Or anyway, the 2 properties that are immediately adjacent on the northeast shore there. So, they certainly have a lot of beach access on their own properties.
That's the one that's on the peninsula too, right?
The peninsula, right? The question is is the beach that's right adjacent to the farm, is that, better beach? It's, mostly cobble. It didn't look like it was excellent sunbathing beach. I do understand there's some access for clamming there, right up on the shore. And certainly that access is still there. But the pinch points do prevent somebody from circumventing the lease along the east side in a motorcraft. My question is why would you want to go in there? If I were trying to get around the lease, I'd go around the other side. If I were trying to access the beach, you can certainly access it from the south or the north. It doesn't appear to me that the pinch point poses a tremendous challenge. But it's not for me to say. I'm not trying to navigate in that pond very often.
Well, let me ask you the question though, which is, we've heard is that, based on what you've heard and the testimony over the last 2 days, as well as all the materials that you've reviewed in your experience, do you have an opinion as to whether the proposed farm would result in significant conflicts with water-dependent uses and activities such as recreational boating, fishing, swimming, and navigation?
Objection.
Am I allowed to answer?
Object to the foundation. He's been in the Secret Cove once. He has no idea what the activities and the uses are in that cove. There's no observations at all about any activities and uses in that cove. He's been there once.
Well,
How can you give an opinion?
that goes to the weight, doesn't it? You know, it seems to me on this, with these witnesses, that the issue comes down to this use versus recreational uses. And it seems to be part and parcel of what goes on in these things. So to me, the witness should be allowed to answer the question. The fact that he's been to Cedar Cove once, the fact that his expertise is with aquaculture itself goes to the weight of his testimony. So I think it's appropriate for him to answer, and that can be an issue for cross-examination later. Madam Chair, I recommend that he be allowed to answer.
Madam Chair, may I have a continuing objection to set on?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is that reflected by the court reporter?
And then I would ask that the court reporter just read the question back again, please.
Question, well, let me ask you, oops, hold on 1 second, I'm sorry. Question, well, let me ask you the question. Based on what you heard in the testimony over the last 2 days, as well as all the materials that you have reviewed in your experience, do you have an opinion as to whether or not the proposed farm would result in significant conflicts with water-dependent uses and activity, such as recreational boating, fishing, swimming, and navigation?
So, having visited probably over 100 aquaculture farms up and down the coast, having spent my entire life working on the water, having spent my entire life recreating on the water, I would say that, there is ample space to, it actually looks like a pretty small cove for water skiing in my mind. Having grown up on a body of water where we water skied regularly. But nowadays most people get dragged around in a tube. So slower speed doesn't necessarily require as much space. Certainly there's the lease doesn't necessarily impair paddling in a kayak or a canoe or a wakeboard or a stand-up board. Actually, I would say that the lease actually enhances the experience, because now you've got something cool to look at. You got somebody there to talk to who's, I'm sure, very happy to explain how they're growing oysters. I typically find that people are fascinated by what we do on the water and are very, very curious, and they want to see what's going on and have a conversation. So.
And just finally, Dr. Rowe, based on your experience with aquaculture in Rhode Island over the last few decades, can you speak to how the interest of Mr. Raso and objectors in terms of these conflicts of other water-dependent use be reconciled?
So, it's a balancing act. You have to try and assess the numbers of people who are impacted and the degree of their impact versus the desire of the state to, foster aquaculture. We understand that, the Oyster Act was passed because the state recognized that if you give somebody a lease, they're going to invest in that lease. They're going to plant seed, they're going to pull out predators, and it's going to enhance the productivity of those waters and enhance the value to the state. So, when I sell oysters across the country and somebody has them in a restaurant in Chicago and they've got a big smile on their face and they read about Rhode Island oysters, now they want to come to Rhode Island and go to, go do recreation and have a vacation in Rhode Island. So there are a multitude of cultural, social, economic, as well as environmental benefits associated with aquaculture. The state recognizes that when they put the aquaculture bill into place. And so it's a balancing act that is obviously quite a challenge, which is why we're here with a hearing that's lasting several days.
And while we're focusing just, with the objectors and right here, they're not the only interest that needs to be balanced in terms of Mr. Raso's application, correct?
No, in fact, it's incumbent upon the managers of this resource, of the subtidal waters, to manage them for the benefit of the sovereign, which is everyone in the state. Not just those who are lucky enough to have, waterfront homes.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. No further questions.
Okay, I think I'm gonna end it here. I don't want to start the cross-examination questions because we only have 10 minutes and that's gonna chop up someone's cross-examination. I was looking, Ms. Noonan, at your list of witnesses, and you did have one additional listed, so I assume you're not calling him Michael Stack?
Correct. He was the harbor master, and instead we introduced the certified minutes. You're correct. I will not be calling him.
Okay, all right. So
The committee members want
Ask him any questions? Oh, yeah, that's
to,
true.
we got 10 minutes, might as well.
yeah, I'll, okay, but I will end at 5. And I just want to address what we're going to be doing next time. So next time we have to finish up Dr. Rowe, and then we have to move on to the objector's case. You're going to have some closing argument, Ms. Noonan?
I don't know if you want us to argue just at the subcommittee level or submit. I'd rather just argue orally, but sure, yes.
Okay, we can discuss
And
that.
possible rebuttal. I don't anticipate a rebuttal witness right now, but I might, so.
Okay, so I think I should ask, well, let's do 5 minutes with Dr. Rowe if there's any subcommittee questions. And then I want to ask some questions of Mr. Capizzo and Mr. Wagner as far as their cases and timing. So anyone on the subcommittee have questions for Dr. Rowe?
That was
No,
easy.
Friday after.
I don't believe we have any questions. It was thorough.
And Madam Chair, just to avoid the question for Mr. Capizzo to ask on Tuesday afternoon, just instruct the witness not to speak with anyone because as he is under cross-examination.
Okay.
Right.
All right, Mr. Capizzo and then Mr. Wagner, how much time do you think that you'll need? I'm just trying to gauge for the public when we will be starting public comment, if we will be starting public comment on Tuesday. And, I mean, you take the time that you need to get through your case. I just want to get an idea.
From my perspective, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 witnesses. I've listed 5, but I think there's only going to be 4. The bulk of the testimony will be through Payson Whitney from ESS, our expert witness. That will be the first witness, and then I believe it will follow order of Mr. Hunt, Ms. Cooney, and Mr. Latham. So I would imagine it would take up a good part of Tuesday between presentation and cross.
Okay. And you, Mr. Wagner?
May have 1 witness.
Okay. So it sounds like most of our third day will still be with attorneys and witnesses. And we will unlikely reach public comment. Mr. Willis?
Madam Chair, that's what it sounds like to me. We have been taking names all meeting long, as well as yesterday and via the email that we set up for this hearing. So we do have a list, and as we mentioned this morning, it was at 50 plus, and I'm certain it's grown over the course of today.
Okay, so we will need to schedule at least a fourth meeting,
Agreed.
potentially a fifth meeting,
Agreed.
because we have to get to the rebuttal and workshop. Okay.
Yes.
So do we want to tell the members of the public that they will not be speaking on Tuesday?
Yes, we can do that, Madam Chair. We will get an email out tonight. We will amend our website and let everybody know that. We had already amended the website during the hearing to broach the possibility that Tuesday was hopeful to be for public comment, but maybe not. And we will expound on that and get information out tonight so that the public has clear expectations that Tuesday will be for continuation of this hearing, and public comment will no doubt be at a date to be determined shortly thereafter.
Okay, and if you can communicate that there will be a time limit on each of those speaking, because we have to do that so that we have an endpoint.
Yes.
We'll figure out what the number is, and then we'll calculate the time limit.
Madam Chair, may
Yes.
I inquire, just for those who are listening, and just so there's a clear understanding for the public, are they going to be able to sign up on Tuesday for participating in the public comment, or is that closed as of today?
Oh, closed as of today.
It is closed. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was
Yeah.
clear.
I mean, I think we've given ample opportunity for a period of time before these hearings started. They got yesterday, they got today, and they have to show up and register, and we've given a lot of opportunity.
Does it make sense, Madam Chair, to allow members of the public, because of the number of objections that Mr. Butel have, to leave that open for Tuesday, as there will be additional testimony that may sway the public one way or the other?
Is that your request?
Yes.
Okay. I'll ask subcommittee members what they think about it. The request of Mr. Capizzo to hold open the continued registration of those who want to give public comment orally.
Madam Chair, Ray Coya,
Yes, Mr. Koya.
I think we've had 9 hours of Zoom that they had an opportunity to register. And if there was any time before that or not, I'm not sure. So I think ending it at the end of today would be fair.
Mr. Gomez?
I agree with that. I think that you started the meeting indicating that this would be the last opportunity by the end of today or the end of this meeting. And I concur that they've had ample time to voice, the request to be heard.
Okay, Mr. Murray?
I would agree as well. I think Mr. Coya mentions 9 hours plus the lengthy travel of this application and all the public comment that's part of the package in terms of the letters and what have you. So I think it's fair.
Okay. Ms. Reynolds?
I'm also in agreement. I think ample opportunity has been provided.
Okay, so there you have it. We're gonna close it, at 5 today.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Right, anything else administratively that we need to discuss, Mr. Willis, Mr. DeSisto?
No, Madam Chair, we have just addressed what staff needs to do at 5:01.
I don't
We
have any-
apologize to staff that it's 5:01 for that.
No worries, no worries.
Okay, all right, I'll move to adjourn this second session of the subcommittee.
Second it.
Thank you, Mr. Koya. All those in favor say aye.
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 Nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Night.
Good weekend.
Thank you.